Thank you, you're beautiful too. Right, good evening everyone. Straight in at the deep end with me. By the end of this evening, I hope that you will have all made yourself a promise to start using common sense as little as possible. Now, I can understand if that causes some degree of consternation in the room, but I think it has several major flaws which most people don't actually seem to be aware of. Now, this problem was first drawn to my attention by my master supervisor, who one day said to me, "Common sense says that many hands make light work, but also that too many cooks spoil the broth." And I didn't hear what he said after that because I was too busy having a moment of enlightenment. How can such a fundamental human cognitive tool be so heavily relied upon when it can so blatantly contradict itself? So what I hope to do in the short time we have together here this evening is to convince you that common sense isn't actually that common, doesn't make that much sense, and in some cases is even just flat out wrong. But before going any further, I feel it would be helpful to have a working definition. And by far the best one I've come across is the one given by Duncan Watts in his wonderful book. So I'm going to take you through that, and then I'm going to look at 3 of his practical examples in order to back up my argument. So what Duncan did was to contrast common sense with science. Now science is a purely theoretical pursuit. It wants to come up with answers, and it wants to know how and why it got them. Contrast that with common sense, and it is something that is very, very practically minded. You don't need to know how or why you got the answer, you just need to have it. Secondly, of course, scientific research is something where data is collected from specially selected population samples. And that data is then analysed and generalised in order to try and come up with scientific theories. Again, contrasting that with common sense, its answers are very specific and have a very narrow degree of generalisation. If you don't get the joke on that slide, then shame on you. So, now that we've got our definition down, let's start looking at some practical examples. And the first one was a study that was introduced by sociologist Paul Lazarsfeld, which claimed that American soldiers who grew up in rural areas dealt with army life much better than those who grew up in big cities. Does that make sense? Yes. Well, that's very interesting you should say that, because that's in actual fact the complete opposite of what the study found. But that was the whole point that Lazarsfeld was trying to make. If every answer and its opposite is obvious, then quite clearly there's a problem. Right, audience participation time. We're going to do a quick thought experiment. I want everyone on the left, you sir, to imagine that I've given you £100. And without discussing the matter, you have to make a cash offer to somebody on the right-hand side of the room. If your offer gets accepted, happy days, you split the money, you both go home. But if the offer is rejected, then I take the whole £100 back. So on the count of 3, I want everyone on the left to shout out what offer they're going to make, and everyone on the right to shout out what the minimum offer they will accept is. 1, 2, 3. 150! Yeah, and therein lies your problem. If common sense really was that common, I would have expected you to all come up with the same answer. Furthermore, you will all have had different reasons as to why you chose the number that you did. But of course, if you have to explain that to somebody, that means that your answer didn't just make sense to others. So that's not being common and not making sense. To finish off with, I want to look at a very famous example of common sense just getting it plain wrong. And this is taken from an American game show that was very popular in the 60s and 70s, and it's called the Monty Hall problem, named after the host. Okay, so the problem is, contestants were given a choice of one of 3 boxes, one containing a star prize and 2 containing a booby prize, for some reason usually goats. Contestant picks box, and Monty Hall would open one of the 2 boxes with a booby prize in, and then ask the contestant whether they wanted to swap or not. So do you swap or not, or doesn't it matter? Well, hopefully by now you've realised that the common sense answer is actually the wrong one. But for those who've never seen this one before, can you actually work out what the right answer is? So in summary, I appreciate that this is a difficult promise to ask you to make, but please remember the words of Christopher Hitchens. Take the risk of thinking for yourself much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you. Thank you.